The U.S. military oftentimes plays important roles in peacekeeping operations in other countries around the world, and the Lebanon conflict of 1982 was no different. What operations did the U.S. military carry out during this war, and what artillery were deployed? Stay with us in this video to find out these and so much more. The Lebanon conflict between the country's pro-government and pro-Syrian factions lasted for many years, until a 1981 US-brokered ceasefire between the Palestine Liberation Organization and Israel. However, the ceasefire was broken in June 1982 when an assassination attempt was made on Israel's ambassador to London. Although the Abu Nidal organization was responsible for this attack, Israel blamed the PLO and attacked Lebanon, resulting in a series of events that led to the formation of an international peacekeeping force to intervene. This force was called the Multi-Nation Force, and was made up of 4 participating nations and their special military regiments deployed to Lebanon. Great Britain had their 1st Queen's Dragoon Guards Armored Reconnaissance Regiment. France had 28 French Armored Forces regiments, 4 Foreign Legion regiments, and the 1st Inter-Armed Foreign and French Brigade, and the Italian deployed a number of paratrooper regiments and infantry units. The US military, however, deployed the US Multinational Force, which consisted of 4 different Marine amphibious units. These units are reinforced United States Marine Corps Infantry Battalion as the ground combat element, a medium tiltrotor squadron for aviation combat, a combat logistics battalion, and a command element that functions as the MEU headquarters group. With a war troop size of almost 4,400 trained personnel and infantry that has everything from tanks to ground attack and air support jets, it'd take hours to run through all the ships deployed during the Lebanon conflict. So we'll be mentioning only the vessels that played very vital roles in the conflict, starting with the Iwo Jima-class amphibious assault ships. The 7 ships in this class were the first amphibious assault ships designed and built by the US Navy as dedicated helicopter carriers. They were also the first ships capable of covering up to 20 helicopters to carry up to 1,800 Marines ashore. The first ship in this class was commissioned way back in 1961 as the successor of the Essex-class ships. While the functions of amphibious assault ships are often confused with that of a carrier, these warships were constructed to do a lot more than the average air carrier. They were used to support ground forces on enemy territory, while also serving as helicopter carriers, and during the conflict in Lebanon, these ships also served as the control station for the commander in charge. But like their predecessors, the Iwo Jimas had hangar areas designed to carry the increased weight of landing and parked aircraft, while still being able to support storing spare fuselages and parts, and accommodating working space for men in the lower areas. They also had 2 inboard elevators and a portside deck edge elevator positioned to not interfere with normal operations on deck. This elevator also increased the effective deck space by making extra parking room available. The vessels in this class also had better armor protection, better ventilation and lighting systems, better ammunition handling facilities, and very improved damage control equipment. For exact numbers, the Iwo Jimas measured a massive 592 feet in length, an 80-foot-4 long beam, and a draft of 27 feet. The propulsion engines consisted of 2 600 psi boilers, 1 geared steam turbine, and 1 shaft rated at 22,000 horsepower. Seeing as amphibious assault ships were very large vessels, they had a top speed of 22 knots, armament of 4 3-inch 50 caliber DP guns, and 8-cell Sea Sparrow BPDMS launchers. Having a troop capacity of over 2,100 and a complement of nearly 700, these vessels could also carry about 25 helicopters. Pretty impressive, but they were outclassed and outperformed during the Lebanon conflict by the Tarawa-class ships. This class of ships is originally regarded as the successor to the Iwo Jimas, with the construction of the 5 members taking place between 1971 and 1980. However, the Tarawa class wasn't like the previously built US Navy amphibious assault ships. Instead, they were specifically designed to be landing helicopter assault ships, and by the time of the Lebanon conflict, they were the most modern assault ships available for service. Although 9 ships were commissioned to be constructed in this class, only 5 were completed, with the designs for the original 4 being improved upon to put them in the Wasp class that were built later on. These 5 ships are the USS Tarawa, USS Saipan, USS Bellewood, USS Nassau, and USS Peleliu. Each of these vessels were built to have a full load displacement of 39,967 tons. And it's important to note that they were also much larger in size than the Iwo Jimas, measuring 834 feet in length with a beam of 131.9 feet and a draft of 25.9 feet. Like their predecessors, the Tarawa's propulsion was provided by two combustion engineering boilers fixed together to two Westinghouse turbines. However, these ships received a more effective 70,000 horsepower and were fitted with a bow thruster in addition to the main propulsion system. The Tarawas had a maximum speed of 24 knots and a maximum range of 10,000 nautical miles. You'd see it comprising one Mark 49 Ram surface-to-air missile system, two Vulcan Phalanx close-in weapon systems, 6 Mark 242 25mm automatic cannons, and 8 12.7mm machine guns. However, it's important to note that all of these were only added as part of modifications made to the class in the 90s. By the time of the Lebanon conflict, the amphibious warships had 2 Mark 25 Sea Sparrow missile systems, and 3 5-inch Mk-45 lightweight guns in bow and starboard aft sponsons. Each ship also had 4 Mark 36 SRB-OC launchers, 1 SLQ-25 Nixie towed torpedo, 1 CNAT unit, and 1 SLQ-49 shaft for countermeasures and decoys. Rather than the general helicopter carrier capacity of the previous assault ships, the Tarawa vessels were designed to specific capabilities. They could carry 19 Sikorsky CH-53 Sea Stallions, 26 Boeing Vertol CH-46 Sea Knights, or a mixture of the two, although some records show that they could power and operate up to 6 McDonnell Douglas AV-8B Harrier II jump jets. A few minor modifications would be necessary to enable this feature. After serving as part of the United States multinational force in the Lebanon conflict and a number of other overseas deployments, the Tarawas proved to be extremely efficient. This is why the class of amphibious assault ships that succeeded them had so many similarities to these ships. Moving on. Another set of ships used in the Lebanon conflict by the U.S. Marines were the Austin-class amphibious transport dock ships. The 12 ships in this class are also referred to as landing platform docks and were used during the conflict to embark, transport, and land elements of landing force for expeditionary warfare missions. Essentially, they were used to carry out the missions of amphibious transports, amphibious cargo ships, and the older dock landing ships. Unlike those specialized vessels, these ships had both a flight deck and a well deck, which meant they could be ballasting and deballasting to support landing craft or any form of amphibious vehicles. While the U.S. Navy has now replaced LSDs, like the Austin class, with the LPDs, back in 1982 when the U.S. joined the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Lebanon, these ships were the best around. The vessels in this class are often referred to as an enlarged version of the preceding Rayleigh class, which had dimensions of 522 feet in length, a beam of 107 feet, and a draft of 22 feet. Originally, the Austin-class ships were about 47 feet longer, with similar draft size, deballast, and 2 feet less in the beam. The dock of these ships had a 70-meter-long raised level designed to park vehicles, which was connected through a ramp to the flight deck, the ramp in question being structured to serve as a telescoping hangar at the other end. The engine featured 2 boilers that powered the 2 de Laval GT turbines and provided 12,000 shp for each of the 2 propellers. Although these vessels also had a flight deck that could occupy up to 6 CH-46 Sea Knight helicopters, the hangar was only used as a temporary shelter for a single helicopter and not a permanent facility. Seeing as they are transport ships, it's no surprise that these ships were only designed to have a very light armament of just 4 3-inch 50 caliber gun Mark 33 twin mounts. While on deployments, like the Lebanese War, these ships could carry many different watercraft combos, like 1 LCAC, 1 LCU, and 3 LCM-6, 4 LCM-8, 9 LCM-6, or 24 AAVs. For personnel, the complement of each of these vessels in the class includes 24 officers, 396 enlisted, and 900 Marines. Lastly, we'll be looking at the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers, which played very important roles in the conflict. When the Lebanon War broke out in 1982, the Reagan administration deployed some ships to reduce the possibility of the eruption of a larger regional war, and the Nimitz-class ships were some of the first vessels called into action. The nuclear-powered Nimitz-class supercarrier USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, with its battle group, had been serving in the Mediterranean when the war began, but were called upon to assist with the evacuation of American citizens in Lebanon who had been involved in the conflict. Soon after, a number of other carrier battle groups were deployed to make up a 50-ship task force, with 4 carriers and their air wings at the core. Essentially, the Nimitz-class ships were at the front line of establishing a strong stance for the United States and NATO, although the US government also intended to have these ships take part in rescue attempts of other Americans still in Lebanon. Although the infamous siege of Beirut lasted for a few months, within days the situation had been stabilized enough, so some of the Nimitz-class carriers were withdrawn to serve other purposes away from frontline action. The ships in this class were designed to supplement the aircraft carriers of Kitty Hawk and Enterprise classes after the US Navy decommissioned a number of older carriers. Because of this, the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers featured a lot of improvements on previous US carriers. Some of the most notable improvements include the Nimitz's use of 2 reactors, which took up less space than the 8 reactors used on Enterprise, and the capacity to carry 90% more aviation fuel and 50% more ordnance when compared to the Forrestal class that had come before them. These ships also had the ability to withstand 3 times the damage sustained by the Essex-class assault ships during World War II. This feature was enabled by dividing the hangars of the Nimitz-class ships into 3 fire bays by thick steel doors to restrict the spread of fire. The United States Navy had suffered many kamikaze attacks from the Imperial Japanese Navy during the Second World War, which is what prompted the inclusion of this design. The Nimitz ships were also constructed with consideration of flaws exploited in other carriers during the Vietnam War, ongoing at the time of their construction. Previous carriers had been constructed with the idea of survivability in mind, rather than the efficiency on a battlefield, as they were rarely subject to enemy attack. To counter this, the Nimitz had larger stores of aviation fuel and larger magazines. They used nuclear power instead of oil for greater endurance, and had the inclusion of new intelligence and technological developments to make their weapon systems readily adjustable. All the ships in this class were powered by 2 A4W nuclear reactors, housed in separate compartments, and had 4 propeller shafts, which produced a maximum speed of over 30 knots. Their engines also featured bulbous bows to improve fastness of speed and fuel efficiency by reducing wave-making resistance. For their armament, all the Nimitz-class carriers, except USS Ronald Reagan, had either 2 or 3 RIM-7 Sea Sparrow or RIM-162 Evolved Sea Sparrow missile Mk-29 missile launchers, which were used to defend against aircraft and anti-ship missiles. They also had 3 or 4 20mm Phalanx CIWS, 4 Sipican Super Rapid Bloom offboard chaff, 6-barrel Mk-36 decoy launchers for deploying infrared flares, and chaff to disrupt the sensors of incoming missiles, and an SSTDS torpedo defense system. Other countermeasures include an AN/SLQ-25 Nixie torpedo and an AN/SLQ-32 jamming system for the purpose of hostile radar signals detection. The USS Ronald Reagan was built exclusively with Mk-49 guided missile launching systems for RIM-116 rolling airframe missiles, although these weapons were later installed on a couple of other members of her class after the Lebanon War. In addition to all these features, the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers used a Kato bar arrangement for their angled flight decks for aircraft operations. This design not only made flight deck operations faster, but also made room for a wider variety of aircraft than that of previous carriers. The ships also deployed an embarked carrier air wing comprising around 64 aircraft and had FA-18E and FA-18F Super Hornets as their air wing strike fighters. Although they served in the Lebanon conflict all those decades ago, the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers are still up there with the most lethal and effective carriers ever designed for the US Navy and Marines. That's all for this video on the US military operations during the Lebanon conflict. Check out our channel for similarly exciting videos like this.